Chats. I'm Heather Bradley, Director of the Center for Nonprofit Resources, and I'm excited to welcome our next thought leader to this podcast series, Patricia Moten Marshall. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Patricia Moten Marshall is a creative thinker and leverages her change leadership skills to cultivate cultures that embrace change. It's no surprise that Pat is an expert on the subject of innovation. Are you ready to jump in, Pat?
I am.
So the first thing I'd like to ask you is about the word innovation, because it means different things to different people. What's your definition of innovation?
When I was thinking about this question, for me, it's about change. It's about transformation. It's about creating something that's new and different from novelty, metamorphosis. So I didn't have like one definition. There was just like a variety of different words that came up for me as I thought about innovation.
Okay. So it seems the push for innovation keeps getting greater and greater. What factors are putting pressure on leaders to nurture innovation in their organizations?
So I think that there's been a lot of research that's been done that's been able to identify that there are certain people out there who just the way they think, the way their mind works isn't one that they're able to create, come up with new ideas. However, to really be able to take that, to be able to create those new ideas where you may not have a person or persons that minds work that way, and then to be able to carry out that innovation to a place where it actually becomes the reality involves more than just one person. And so what I think that we've come to realize is that those organizations that are able to do the best innovation are ones where people work as a team. They work in a collaborative way in order to be about not only to come up with the new ideas, to come up with the new and different from, to be able to then carry it out into a place of completion. And so that's one thing. The second thing is that as you look at innovation that comes from an individual versus innovation that comes from a team, that we're really finding that the best outcomes are those that come from the team, where that team bringing together the diversity of talents, the diversity of ways of thinking together in order to come up with the ideas, to come up and then to be able to implement them into reality is a team effort. It's not an individual effort. So that's the first thing, just the recognition that if we use all the resources in our organization working together in a collaborative manner, that we can achieve better outcomes, better new ways of doing things. All of that in response to the fact that the world is changing so quickly, that we are being impacted by so many different external factors that make our old solutions no longer viable, no longer working, that require us to kind of think of new answers to the problems that we're facing or the challenges that we're facing. And so therefore, we've got to come up with those new solutions. We recognize now that by having the people in the organization all prepared to come together and collaboratively be able to achieve those new innovations, that all of that is kind of like that push around innovation today. So I'm hoping that kind of just kind of shares kind of like the two pieces working together that's causing that push.
It really shapes it. So, Pat, I know that you've worked with a number of different organizations across a number of sectors. In your observation, what are the key factors that create resistance to innovation?
So on the one hand, when I talked about that the world externally is changing and it causing those old solutions to no longer be viable, that also is what's causing that resistance to innovation. That we as human beings, that we get comfortable with the way things are. We get comfortable in kind of like doing things the way that we're used to doing them. And even though in some cases where we know that trying something new and doing it a new way is actually going to be better for us, that we get comfortable. And what's happening today is the change is happening so quickly, and we are being impacted by changes that are going on, not just within our organizations, the changes that we're being impacted by in our personal life, the changes that are impacting us that are global or societal changes, that we are kind of like pushing back and saying, you know what, I can't take more and more things. And so if you come up with a new way of doing it, if you come up with a new innovation with the organization, it's kind of like on top of all these other things that I'm having to then assimilate to or adjust to. And I always use the phrase from Alvin Toffler, who wrote a book back in the 1960s called Future Shock, where he said that there'd be a point in time that we would be having to assimilate so much change that people begin to display dysfunctional behavior. And so I think that what it calls for us is not to change, not to come up with new innovations. It calls for us to, number one, educate people on our own psychological response to all of this change. Number two, to be able to implement change more effectively. And that's, as we think about this innovation, how can we do it in a way that is not seen as drudgery, that's seen as something that is, brings out, the excitement in people and the curiosity in people, and that we also kind of build our own personal and organizational resilience as we go about bringing about these innovations. And so, that's kind of this concept of resistance is, from my perspective, is why it's surfacing today and sometimes pushing back really hard.
So Pat, as you know, our client base are nonprofit charitable organizations. In your experience, is there anything different in the nonprofit sector that influences our ability to innovate?
So I just want to say that I don't think that it makes us less capable. I think that where the challenge is that sometimes with the what our mission is and what we're trying to achieve, that our resources to be able to then carry out that work, and on top of that, to be able to simultaneously do the innovations and do the changes, that sometimes it's just the time and the resources are not as potentially abundant as they might be in the private sector. And so it's really just how do we potentially either come up with a way of doing it that doesn't use up as many resources and as much time, so that we can afford ourselves the time to actually go about doing the innovation. So that's just the way I'm thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. So as you can tell, Pat brings a lot of experience and expertise in this area, and we're fortunate to be hosting her on November 8th for an upcoming workshop. We'd love to have you join us. It's a workshop entitled Establishing an Environment for Your Innovation. You can register online at C4NPR.org. Thank you for joining us for this episode of C4NPR Chat.